and welcome to a special edition of our weekly news bulletin from the Christian Institute. As regular viewers to our news video will know, the Christian Institute exists to be a Christian influence in a secular world. We do that in many ways, including our news output, our regular contact with supporters, our meetings all across the country and our publications. We also take advantage of our democratic freedom to engage in the political process. Naturally, that work is heavily influenced by the events and policy making taking place in the parliaments in England and Scotland and the assemblies in Northern Ireland and Wales. Well, to give us an update on all things good and bad working their way through our corridors of power, I'm joined by Simon Calvert, the CI's Deputy Director for Public Affairs, who has been at the forefront of many campaigns which affect Christians throughout the UK. Simon, thank you for joining me today. So let's start with some good news. And already this year, the Christian Institute's been involved at the heart of a couple of really important victories at Westminster. Now, you led the campaign on Clause 1 of the Anti-social Behaviour Bill, which saw the government drop the plans for IPNAs and replace them with ASBOs. Could you explain what that campaign was all about?
Well, in short, the government wanted to make it illegal to be annoying in a public place. Right. And you only have to say that to know that that's a ridiculous law. And it's also a dangerous law. And thankfully, the issue was so obvious that we very quickly were able to get a lot of support for our campaign to amend it. We were very glad to be able to work again with the National Secular Society and the Peter Tatchell Foundation, Big Brother Watch and others who had previously worked with us on free speech issues. We all came together again under the auspices of the Reform Clause 1 campaign. And that worked very well. We found that in the House of Lords, again, there was very quickly a groundswell of understanding of the issue. Lord Deer, a former Chief Constable, agreed to lead the campaign for us there in the Lords, and he did a terrific job. And so the outcome there was an enormous defeat for the government in the House of Lords. Their proposals to bring in these annoyance orders were voted down by the House of Lords by the biggest anti-government vote of this Parliament. So that was astonishing. That was very good news. And that forced the government into a climb down. Yeah,
and the encouragements carried on just a few days later when a last-minute attempt to slip compulsory sex education in primary schools was defeated in the Children and Families Bill. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so again, that's in the House of Lords. There, the Labour Party sought to bring in this amendment which would have made sex education compulsory for primary schools. Now, there's a lot of concern amongst parents that their children are already exposed to far too much material which is too adult for them at a young age, and so they're naturally very concerned about the idea of compulsory sex education in primary schools. The current law is that it's up to the school, the head, the governors, to decide what's appropriate for their pupils in their school, and that seems the sensible approach. To force primary schools to provide sex education and to dictate to them what should be in that sex education is a very bad idea. And there's been a lot of concern about the kinds of materials. The Christian Institute did a publication a couple of years ago where we highlighted some of the really shocking stuff that's been produced and recommended for schools. And I think there's a sort of a knock-on effect from us having done that work. There is a greater realisation that there is a problem, and a greater realisation that parents are the ones who need to be most involved in deciding what's best for sex education as far as their kids go. So there's bound to be another attempt to bring in compulsory sex education, but I think we've got a lot of goodwill to work with on that issue in the future.
Great. Now, the controversial lobbying bill came under attack from 130 organisations. It's probably quite unlikely for them all to work together usually. What was that bill all about? How successful were you, and what were you trying to achieve with that?
Yeah, well, again, it was a great privilege to work with these sort of household name voluntary groups like the Countryside Alliance and the Royal British Legion and Friends of the Earth and others. And again, across the groups, there'll be lots of things we disagree about, but one thing we were agreed about is that we should be free to campaign for what we believe in. Now, the government's bill actually cut across that freedom and jeopardise the ability of groups to be able to raise the issues that they care about in the year before a general election. And it all got caught up with concern about lobbying scandals, and it was all terribly technical and to do with electoral law. But the upshot is that if the Royal British Legion, for example, wants to campaign to make sure that soldiers overseas have got proper equipment, that could be caught by the government's new lobbying bill and their new spending limits. We were able to make some improvements to the bill. The size of the campaign and the quality of the work done by many of these other groups was incredible, and the government were forced into a climb down. But it's still a bad bill. It's still going to have a chilling effect, I think, on campaign groups in the run-up to the next election. But, you know, we were able to make a dent in it, and there'll be a review. That was one thing we were able to secure, a review in the future, and we'll be able then to highlight, you know, the damage that the legislation has done, and hopefully press for changes.
Okay. Now just moving to look at the Scottish Parliament, just last week we heard the MSPs have voted to legalise same-sex marriage there. Now I know that a lot of work's been going on to try and highlight to politicians the dangers of going ahead with that legislation, so just how disappointed are you about that?
It's very disappointing, isn't it, that the Scottish Parliament has gone the same way as the Parliament at Westminster, and they've legislated to redefine marriage. You simply cannot redefine marriage. Marriage is the union of one man and one woman for life, and no matter what any parliament says about it, that will always be true. But it's naturally disappointing that MSPs voted in such large numbers for this measure. And it was disappointing as well that early promises which were made by the Scottish Government to give protections were not kept.
Right.
And so that's very concerning. So there are not as many protections in the Scottish legislation as there are, in fact, in the legislation from Westminster. But what we can't be disappointed about is the size of the reaction from the general public in Scotland. The scale of the Scotland for Marriage campaign, which we're part of, in Scotland, per capita was actually much bigger even than the Coalition for Marriage campaign that took place here in England and Wales. So we have to be thankful that 54,000 people signed the petition, that there were 600 volunteers in constituencies all across Scotland who were representing the concerns to their politicians and engaging with local members of the public. So we have to be glad for that. And that means there is a strong body of people there in Scotland who understand what's going on and who we hope will continue to stand for the truth of marriage in the future.
Okay. Now next week MSPs at Holyrood are going to vote on another bill to assign a named person or a state guardian to every child under the age of 18. Now top barrister Aidan O'Neill has said that that may be unlawful, and others have described it as an attack on the civil liberties of law-abiding parents. I assume that's a view you would agree with?
Yes, I mean it's a very surprising move that the government wants to appoint somebody who will have legal responsibility for every child in Scotland. In fact, they'll even have the right to give information to that child against the wishes of the parent. I mean, it's a quite remarkable power grab by the state. There's not a lot of time left to try and influence the legislation itself as it goes through the Parliament, but I think there are very clear grounds for a potential review in the courts of that legislation. So it's not over yet. Okay,
so moving on to Northern Ireland, the Justice Minister David Ford there has said he's planning to launch a consultation on abortion law in Northern Ireland. Now many people think that's going to be used to try and weaken the law on abortion there. What do you think lies behind that move, and what things are being done to try and protect that situation there?
Well, it's strange. There's not a great groundswell of public opinion in Northern Ireland to liberalise abortion law.
Right.
Across the different communities in Northern Ireland, one of the things in which there's broad agreement is that life is sacred from conception, and so they're opposed to abortion. The consultation seems to have come about because the minister did a series of interviews on a BBC radio chat show. And the host of the chat show and the minister, well, they're very keen on liberalising abortion law, and that's what seems to have generated this consultation. So the consultation hasn't started yet. There'll be time for Christians and others concerned about this to take part in that consultation. In the meantime, at the Christian Institute, we will be examining the proposals, monitoring what's going on, and engaging with churches to help them be prepared for when this consultation comes about.
Okay, and so finally, just looking at Wales, Assembly members voted this week to reject an amendment to the Social Services Bill that would actually have criminalised parents who smack their children. What's your reaction to that vote?
So Christian Institute supporters wrote to Assembly members about that issue, and I'm sure that had an impact on how Assembly members decided to vote and on the reaction of the Welsh Government. And it was very good news that it was voted down by such a wide margin. However, the Welsh Government has indicated that there's going to be time to return to that issue before the 2016 election. So again, that's another issue that's not going away. And parents are going to have to be vigilant, keep an eye out for proposals, and again be prepared to write letters and engage with their politicians when that issue comes up again.
Well, Simon, thanks for coming in and sharing that with us. Sam Mason will be back next week with another one of our regular weekly bulletins. And don't forget, if you would like more information on any of the issues discussed in today's programme, visit our website at christian.org.uk. Until next time, goodbye.